It's a good day today too. So let's learn my English. Let's read Of Human Bondage. I will have I will give Chinese class today. So you see, and my student, he can only speak English. That's why I need to practice English. um, you know, uh, next year I will find a job in child care service. So I need to practice to practice English too. So this is why I learn English, and the more I learn, the more I like English. A lot of words they we don't have in Chinese. Yeah, this is the same. In Chinese, we have a lot of word we don't have in English. So this is the charming of languages. So we need to, if we can, we we need to learn more and more languages. That will be the best. My daughter, so she can speak Chinese, English, French, uh, German, and she want to learn Spanish too. So she knew a lot of languages, and now she is a tutor of French, and she's good at mathematics, good at science, good at art, good at a writing, and now she likes computer science, do it pretty well, and she wants to do law. I don't know finally what she will do, but this is what she like, and she's so smart, very clever. Very clever with studying. She spent so little time to learn, and she can got it, and so that is why she like those hard study. And if because if the subject is too easy, she will got bored. So I'm her mother, but I'm not that hardworking as her. So I need to change. I need to. Yeah, I'm not stupid, and I am smart but lazy. So I need to change this. You know what? Um, I'm learning. I'm learning. Uh, I'm learning childhood care and childhood education and early childhood education and care. Uh, I'm I'm learning the diploma level, and I have student. I have classmates who ask me questions. What we are learning. When they do assignment, they ask help from me. So sometimes I just think, oh my God, they just tell me uh, my English is not too bad. Yeah, that's so good. Sometimes I just think, oh my God, I should be the last, the bad, the worst student in my class. But I think I can still help others. Mm, like it, this gave me confidence about my English. But I know I still, you see, when I speak English, pretty broken. But I believe I can conquer it. I can come over. So let's begin. Stop chatting. I like chat here. That's so strange, you know. No one chat with me, just myself. But when I face the camera, I want to I just talk to others, you know, just to talk to like like I am talking to others. Act, um, but in the fact, at the fact, um, I'm talking to myself. You see, this is a good practice for me to chat to myself, and this is a different. If I chat myself in a mirror, no, I won't chat a lot. But chat what when I face a camera, mm, help a lot. Mm, sorry. Okay, let's stop chatting. Let's read. Um, yesterday, you know, Philip, I always, you know, mix she and he. That's so bad. You know, in Chinese, he and she, we all pronounces the same thing, ta. So when I speak when I speak in English, I I always, you know, mix them. Even I look at she, I I may read it he. I look at the he, maybe I read she. That's so terrible. But I will overcome it. Okay, I think it will correct my bad English. So let's stop chatting, reading. Okay, yesterday we read here the partitions, the partitions of the cubic partitions, the partitions of the cubicle were of polished pinch pine, and there was a green curtain in front, and there was a in those days there were little thought of ventilation. There was a little thought of ventilation, and the windows were closed except when the dormitory were aired in the morning. Uh, ventilation, ventilation. There was little thought of ventilation. There was little thought of ventilation, and the windows were closed except when the dormitory were aired in the morning. Philip got up. Philip got up and knelt down. Philip got up and knelt down to say his prayer. It was a cold morning. Oh, got up and knelt down to say his prayer. It was a cold morning, and he shivered, he shivered a little. But he had been taught by his uncle that his prayer were more acceptable God, to God if he said them in his nightshirt he than if he waited until he was dressed. This did not this didn't surprise him, for he was beginning to realize that he was the creator of a God who appreciated the discomfort of his worship. Then then she washed. There were two baths of 50 boarders. There were two baths for 50 boarders, and each board baths once a week. The rest of his washing was done. The rest of his washing was done in the small basin, in a small basin on a washstand, which with the bed and a chair made up, which with the bed and a chair made up the furniture of each cubicle. The boy uh, the boys chatted gaily. The boys chatted gaily while they dressed. Philip was Philip was all ears. Was all ears. Philip was all ears. What was all ears? 听着，大概是 was all ears. Then another bell sounded, and then another bell sounded, and they ran downstairs. They took their seats on the form. They took their seats on the form on each side of the two long tables in the schoolroom. And Mr. Watson, followed by his wife and the servants, came in. Watson read prayers in an impressive manner, and the supplications sounded out in his loud voice. 恳求、哀求、祈愿。OK. Supplications. Oh my God, this is so 祈求、哀求。And the supplications. 应该是祈愿。祈愿。And the supplications sounded of loud voice, as though they were threats personally addressed to each boy. Philip listened with anxiety. Then Mr. Watson read a chapter from the Bible, and the servant, in a moment, the untidy youngs brought in two large pots. I need to make it sure. Youth. Youth.
Youth.
Youth.
Youth. Youth.
Youth. The untidy youth. Youth. The untidy youth. The untidy youth brought in two large pots of tea, and on the second journey, immense dishes of bread and butter. Philip had a squeamish appetite. Squeamish. 容易呕吐、过分拘谨的 squeamish.
Squeamish.
Squeamish, the thick slab of butter on the bread turned his stomach, but he saw 过分难以取悦的、很挑剔的 squeamish appetite. Squeamish 取悦的 squeamish appetite. Some have squeamish appetite. The seed and the thick slabs of poor butter. The thick slab 厚片，这个厚片，它这个也是厚片。The thick slab of poor butter， 这个也是厚片的意思。Butter on the bread turned his stomach, but he saw other boys scraping it off and followed their example. They all had potted meat and such like. They all had potted meats. They all had potted meats and such like their play boxes, and some had extra egg or bacon, upon which Mr. Watson made a profit. When he had asked Mr. Curry whether Philip was to have this, Mr. Curry replied that he didn't think boys should be spoiled. Mr. Watson quite agreed with him. He considered nothing was better than bread and butter for growing lads, but some parents unduly pampering their offspring insisted on unduly 不适当的 unduly pumping is it unduly yes unduly pampering pampering unduly pampering their offspring unduly 不适当的 pampering their offspring insisted on it. Philip noticed that extra gave boys a certain consideration and make up his mind when he wrote to Aunt Louisa to ask for them. Philip noticed that extras gave boys a certain consideration and gave boys a certain consideration. 尊敬 this is not only so it's not only 照顾关心还有尊敬还有尊敬的意思 This is why the boy wanted give boys a certain consideration and make up his mind when he wrote to Aunt Louisa to ask for them. After breakfast, the boys wanted to go. The boys were gradually wandered out into the playground. Here, the day boys were gradually assembling. They were sons of the local clergy, of the officers at the depot, and of such manufacturers or men of business as the old town possessed. Presently a bell rang. After breakfast, the boy wandered out into the playground. Here the day boys were gradually assembling. They were sons of local clergy, of the officers at the depot, and of such manufacturers or all men of business as the old town possessed. Presently a bell rang, and they all trooped into school. This consisted of a large long room, at opposite end of which two master conducted the second and third form, and of a smaller one leading out of it, used by Mr. Watson, who taught the first form. This consisted of a large long room, at opposite end of which two masters conducted the second and the third form, and of a smaller one, leading out it used by Mr. Watson, who taught the first form. To attach the pre prepar prepar preparatory to attach the preparatory to the senior school. These three classes were known officially. To attach the preparatory preparatory 准备的初步的 to attach the preparatory 初步的 to the senior school. Preparatory school. 初步的小学应该大概是初步的 to attach the preparatory to the senior school. These three classes were known officially on speech days and in sports as upper, middle, and low second, and lower, upper, middle, and lower second. Philip was put in the last. The master, a red-faced man with a pleasant voice, was called Rex. He had a jolly manner with boys, and the time passed quickly. I need some hot water. And the time passed quickly. Sorry. He had a jolly manner with boys, and the time passed quickly. Philip was surprised when it was 11:15, and they were let out for 10 minutes rest. The whole school rushed noisily. The whole school rushed noisily into the playground. The whole school rushed noisily into the playground. The new boys were told to go into the middle. The new boy were told to go into the middle, while the others stationed. The new boys were told to go into the middle, while the other stations stationed themselves along opposite walls. The new boys were told to go into the middle, while the others stationed themselves along opposite walls. They began to play peg in the middle. The old boys ran from boys tried to catch them. When one was seized, and the mastic word said, why he became a prisoner, and turning sides helped to catch those who were still free. Philip saw a boy running past and tried to catch him, but his lamp gave him no chance, and the runner, taking the opportunity, made straight for the ground he covered. Then one of them had the brilliant idea of imitating Philip's clumsy run. Other boys saw it and began to laugh. Then they all occupied the first, and they ran round Philip, limping grotesque,怪诞的 grotesquely
grotesque,
怪诞的 They ran round Philip, limping grotesquely. screaming in their treble voice, treble, 高音的，尖锐的 treble voice. I think it's treble. It's not. Yes. 高音的 screaming in their treble voice with thrilling laughter. They lost their head with the delight of their they lost their head with the delight of their new amusement, and choked with helpless merriment. One of them tripped up and trapped. Trip. I know this is trip. Yes, still trip. One of them tripped Philip up, and he fell heavily as he always fell, and cut his knee. They laughed all the louder when he got up. A boy pushed him from behind, and he would have fallen again if another had not caught him. The game was forgotten in the entertainment of Philip's deformity. That's deformity.
deformity, deformity,
I need to check what the club foot is. 不是小儿麻痹呀。Deformity. 畸形 Deformity. Yes. One of them invented an odd rolling lamp that struck the rest as supremely ridiculous, and several of the boys lay down on the ground and rolled about in laughter. Philip was completely scared. He couldn't make out why they were laughing. His heart beat so that he could hardly breathe. And he was more frightened than he had ever been in his life. He stood still stupidly while the boys ran round him, mimicking and laughing. That's so hard for a child. So bad. This is so bad.
mimic,
Mimic. Mimic. 那为什么没有呢？
mimic,
模仿 mimicking and laughing. They shouted to him to try and catch them, but he did not move. He didn't want them to see him run anymore. He was using all his strength to prevent himself from crying. Suddenly the bell rang, and they all trooped back to school. Philip's knee was bleeding, and he was dusty and disheveled. and dishevel, 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 dishevel,
dishevel,
and disheveled, and disheveled. 头发蓬乱。She was dusty and disheveled. For some minutes, Mr. Rex could not control his form. They were excited still by the strange novelty, and Philip saw one or two of them furtively looking down at his knee. Furtively. 贼头贼脑的，鬼鬼祟祟的，偷偷的。鬼祟，鬼鬼祟祟。Furtively looking down at his knee, at his feet. I thought they care about his bleeding knee 呢。Looking down at his feet, he tucked them under the bench. In the afternoon, they went up to play football, but Mr. Watson stopped Philip to the way out after dinner. I suppose you can't play football, Carrie? He asked him. Philip blushed self-consciously. No, sir. Very well. You'd better go up to the field. You can walk as far as that, can't you? Philip had no idea where the field was, but he answered all the same, yes, sir. The boys weren't in charge of Mr. Rex, who glanced at Philip and see he had not changed, asked why he was not going to play. The boys weren't in charge of Mr. Rex, who glanced at Philip and seeing he had not changed, asked why he was not going to play. Mr. Watson said I needn't, sir, said Philip. Why? There were boys all around him, looking at him curiously, and a feeling of shame came over Philip. He looked down without answering. Others gave the reply. He's got a club foot, sir. Oh, I see. Mr. Rex was quite young. He had only taken his degree a year before, and he was suddenly embarrassed. His instinct was to beg the boy's pardon, but he was too shy to do so. His instinct was to pardon, but he was too shy to do so. He made. Now then, you boys, what are you waiting about for? Get on with you. Some of them had already started, and those that were left now set off in group of 2 or 3. You'd better come along with me, Carrie, said the master. You don't know the way, do you? Philip guessed Cantonese. Cues. Cue, not guess. Guess. Philip guessed the Cantonese, and a sob came to his throat. I can't go very fast, sir. Then I'll go very slow, said the master with a smile. Philip's heart went out to the red-faced. Come commonplace young man who said a gentle word to him, he suddenly felt less unhappy. But at night, when they went up to bed and were undressing, the boy who was called Singer came out of his cubicle and put his head in Philip's. "I say, let's look at your foot." "No," answered Philip. He jumped into bed quickly. "Don't say no to me," said Singer. "Come on, Mason." The boy in the cubicle was looking round the corner, and at the words he slipped in. They tried to tear the bedclothes off him, but he held them tightly. "Why can't you leave me alone?" he cried. Singer seized a brush and with the back of it beat Philip's head, clenching on the clenched on the blanket. Philip cried out, "Why don't you show us your foot quietly?" "I won't!" In desperation, Philip clenched his fist and hit the boy who tormented him. But he was at a disadvantage, and the boy seized his arm. He began to turn in. "Oh, don't," said Philip. "You will break my arm." Stop still then, and put out your foot." Philip gave a sob and a gasp. The boy gave the arm another twitch. The pain was unendurable. Oh my God. "All right, I'll do it," said Philip. He put out his foot. Singer still kept his hand on Philip's waist. He looked curiously at the deformity. Isn't it beastly?" said Mason. Another came in and looked too. "Ugh," he said, in disgust. "My word, it's ram. Is it hard?" 奇特的，so bad。然后跑哪儿去了？it's ram. It's ram. "My word, it's ram," said Singer, made a face. "Is this hard?" He touched it with the tip of his forefinger, curiously, as though it was something that had a life of its own. Suddenly they heard Mr. Watson's heavy tread on the stairs. They threw the clothes back on Philip and dashed like rabbits into their cubicle. Mr. Watson came into the dormitory, raising himself to tiptoe. He could see over the road that bore the green curtain, and he looked into 2 or 3 of the cubicles. The boys were safely in bed. He put off the light and went out. Singer called out to Philip, but he didn't answer. He had got his teeth in the pillow so that his sobbing should be inaudible. He was not crying for the pain, nor for the humiliation he had suffered when they looked at his foot, but with rage at himself because, unable to stand the torture, He had put off his feet. He had put off his foot of his own accord. Own accord. As he had put off his foot of his own accord, and then he felt the misery, of his life. It seemed to his childish mind that this unhappiness must go on forever. For no particular reason, he remembered that cold morning when Emma had taken him out of bed and put him beside his mother. For no particular reason, he remembered that cold morning when Emma had taken him out of bed and put him beside his mother. He had not thought of it once since it happened. But now he seemed to feel the warmth of his mother's body against his, and her arms around him. Suddenly, it seemed to him that his life was a dream. His mother's death, and the life at the vicarage, and these two witched day, wretched, these two wretched days at school, and he would awake in the morning and be back again at home. His tear dried as he thought of it. He was too unhappy. It must be nothing but a dream, and his mother was alive, and Emma would come up presently and go to bed. He fell asleep. But when he awoke next morning, it was to the clanging of a bell. But when he awoke next morning, it was to the clanging of a bell, and the first thing his eyes saw was the green curtain of his cubicle. As time went on, Philip's deformity ceased to interest. As time went on, Philip's deformity ceased to interest. It was except like one boy's red hair and another unreasonable corpulence. And another corpulence, but meanwhile 肥胖 corpulence.
Corpulence.
我猜出来了是肥胖，那我们就不把它写下来。corpulence 能猜出来的就不要写。And another's unreasonable corpulence. But meanwhile, he had grown horribly sensitive. He never ran if he could help it, because he knew it made his lamp more conspicuous.我也猜出来 conspicuous.
Conspicuous. Conspicuous.
明显 His lamp more conspicuous made he never ran if he could help. But he knew it made his lamp more conspicuous, and he adopt a peculiar walk, and he adopted a particular walk. He stood still as much as he could, with his clapped foot behind the other, so that it shouldn't attract notice, and he was constantly on the lookout for any reference to it, because he could not join in the games which other boys played. Their life remained strange to him. The only interested himself from the outside in their doings, and it seemed to him that there was a barrier between them and him. Sometimes, because he could not join the game which the other boys played, their life remained strange to him. The only interested himself. He only interested himself from outside in their doings, and it seemed to him that there was a barrier between them and him. Sometimes that it was his fault if he could not play football, and he was unable to make them understand. He was left a good deal to himself. He had been inclined to talk, talkativeness, talkativeness, but gradually he became silent. He had talkatively, talkative. Oh, he had been inclined to talkatively, but gradually he became silent. He began to think of difference between himself and others. The biggest boy in his dormitory, Singer, took a dislike to him, and Philip, small for his age, had to put up with a good deal of hard treatment. Had to put up with a good had to put up with a good deal of hard treatment. About halfway through the term, a mare ran through the school for a game called Nip. A mania 狂躁热狂热狂热哦 mania 疯狂的 mania
Mania.
mania 狂热疯狂。About halfway through the term, a mania ran through the school for a game called Nips. It was a game for two played on the table, all a form with steel pens. You had to push your nib with the fingernail so as to get the point of it over your opponents. Well, he maneuvered to prevent this and to get the point of his nib over the back of yours. When this result was achieved, you breathed on the ball of your thumb, pressed it hard on the two nib, and if you were able then to let them without dropping either, both nib became yours. I don't know what this is. What nib is. 铅笔尖儿 Yeah, but how? Okay. It was a game for two, played on table, or a form with steel pens. You had to push your fingernail so as to get the point of it over your opponents. While he mano maneuver.
maneuver,
I don't know how to play this word. Maneuver. Maneuver. 技巧、控制、操纵。No. 操纵。To prevent so as to get the point of it over your opponent. Well, he maneuvered to prevent this and to get the point of his neighbor over the back of yours. When this is achieved, you breathe on the ball of your thumb. Press it hard on the two nips, and if you were able, then to lift them without dropping either. Both naps became yours. Soon, nothing was seen but boys playing this game and the more skillful stores of naps. But in a little while, Mr. Watson made up his mind that it was a form of gambling, forbade the game, and confiscate all the nib in the boy's possession and confiscate 没收了 confiscate 哦，真的是没收了 confiscate confiscate all the nibs in the boy's possession.
confiscate,
and confiscated all the nibs in the boy's possession. Philip had been very adroit.
adroit,
adroit 灵巧的，灵活的。Philip had been very adroit, and it was with a heavy heart that he gave up his winning, and it was with a heavy heart that he gave up his winning. But his finger itched to play still, and a few days later, on his way to the football field, he went into a shop and bought a pennyworth of G-pens. He carried them loose in his pocket and enjoyed feeling them. Presently, Singer found out that he had them. Singer had given up his nib too, but he had kept back a very large one, called a jumbo, which was almost unconquerable, and he could not resist the opportunity of getting Philip's jest out of him. Though Philip knew that he was at a disadvantage with his small nib, he had an adventurous disposition and was willing to take the risk. Besides, he was aware that Singer would not allow him to refuse. He had not played for a week and sat down to now with a thrill of excitement. He lost two of his small nib quickly, and Singer was jubilant. But the third time by some slipped round, and Philip was able to put his J across it. He crawled with triumph. At that moment, Mr. Watson came in, jubilant,喜气洋的 was jubilant， 喜气洋洋的。You see, just keep practice and you see
Jubilant. Jubilant.
Yeah, I can read it. 欢呼 was jubilant， 欢呼的，喜气洋洋的。And singer was 得意洋洋的 was jubilant, but the third time, by time chance, Jumbo slipped round, and Philip was able to push his J across with triumph. Crow. He crowed with triumph. Crow. He crowed. 欢呼 crow. 乌鸦啊
Crow. Crow. Crow.
自夸欢呼公鸡提名公鸡提名no 提名公鸡提名公鸡提名欢呼。He crowed with triumph. At that moment, Mr. Watson came in. What are you doing? He asked. He looked from Singer to Philip, but neither answered. Don't you know that I've forbidden you to play that idiotic game? Idiotic. Idiotic. 白痴的 yeah. Idiotic game. 白痴的 idiotic game. Philip's heart beat fast. He knew what was coming and was dreadfully frightened. But in his fright, there was a certain exultation. He had never been Swiss. Of course, it would hurt, but it was something to boast about afterward. But in his fright, there was a certain exultation. Exultation. 狂喜 Is it exultation? Oh, exaltation.
Exultation.
Exaltation. But in his fright, there was a certain exaltation. You see, people strange. He had never been Swiss. He had never been swished. Of course, it would hurt. Swished, 鞭打呀。He had never been swished. Of course, it would, but it was something to boast about afterward. Come into my study. The headmaster turned, and they followed him side by side. Singer whispered to Philip. Mr. Watson pointed to Singer. Bend over, he asked. He sighed. Philip, very white. Philip, very white, saw the boy quiver at each stroke. And after the third, he heard him cry out. 3 more followed. That'll do. Get up. Singer stood up. The tears were streaming down his face. Philip stepped forward. Mr. Watson looked at him for a moment. I'm not going to can you. You are a new boy, and I can't hit a cripple. And don't be naughty again. When they got back into the schoolroom, a group of boys who cripple. That's so bad. When they got back into the schoolroom, a group of boys who had learned in some mysterious way what was happening was waiting for them. They set upon Singer at once with eager questions. Singer his face red with the pain and the marks of tears still on. Pointed with his head at Philip, who was standing a little behind him. He got off because he's a cripple, he said angrily. Philip stood silent and flushed. He felt that they looked at him with contempt. Contempt. 轻蔑, that's so bad. Contempt.
Contempt.
蔑. Look at him with contempt. How many did you get? One boy asked Singer. But he didn't answer. He was angry because he had been hurt. Don't ask me to play nip with you again, he said to Philip. It's jolly nice for you. You don't risk anything. I didn't ask you. Didn't you? He quickly put off his foot and tripped Philip up. Philip was always rather unsteady on his feet, and he fell heavily to the ground. Cripples, said Singer. For the rest of the term, he tormented Philip cruelly, and though Philip tried to keep out of his way, the school was so small that it was impossible. He tried being friendly and jolly with him. He abased himself so as to buy him a knife. Friendly and jolly with him, he abased himself so far as to buy him a knife. But though Singer took the knife, he was not placated. He was not placated. Once or twice, driven beyond endurance, he hit and kicked the bigger boy, but Singer was so much stronger than so much stronger that Philip was helpless, and he was always forced after more or less torture to beg his pardon. It was that which rankled with Philip. He could not bear the humiliation of apology, which were wrung from him by pain greater than he could bear. And what made it worse was that there seemed no end to his wretched, wretched, wretchedness, wretchedness, seemed no end to his wretchedness. Singer was only 11 and would not go to the upper school till he was 13. Philip must live 2 years with a tormentor from whom there was no escape. He was only happy while he was working and when he got into bed, and often there recurred to him then that queer feeling that his life, with all his misery, was nothing but a dream, and that he would awake in the morning in his own little bed in London. 2 years passed, and Philip was nearly 12. He was in the first form, within two or three places of the top. And after Christmas, when several boys would be leave for the senior school, he would be head boy. He had already quite a collection of prizes, worth this worthless books on bad paper, but in gorgeous blendings decorated with the arms of the school. His position had freed him from bullying. He was not unhappy. His fellow forgave him his success because of his fellow forgave him his success because of his deformity. After all, it's jolly easy for him to After all, it's jolly easy for him to get prizes, they said. There's nothing he can do but swat. 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 There's nothing he can do but swat. He had lost his early terror. He had lost his early terror of early terror. He had lost his early terror of Mr. Watson. He had grown used to the loud voice, and when the headmaster's heavy hand was laid on his shoulder, Philip discerned vaguely the intention of a caress. Philip discerned 感觉 discern 辨别出分清。Philip discerned vaguely the intention of a caress. He had the good memory which is more useful for scholastic achievement. Scholastic, more useful for scholastic achievements than mental power. Then Mr. Watson expected him to leave the preparatory school with a scholarship. But he had grown very self-conscious. The newborn child doesn't realize that his body is more a part of himself than objects, and will play with his toe without any feeling that they belong to him, more than the rattle by his side. And it's only by degrees, through pain, that he understands the face of the body. and the experience of the individual to become conscious of himself. But he had grown very self-conscious. The newborn child does not realize that his body is more a part of himself than surrounding objects. That's psychology. The newborn child does not realize that his body is more a part of himself than surrounding objects, and will play with his toe without any feeling that they belong to him more than the rattle by his side. And it's only by degrees through pain that he understands the face of the body. And experience of the same kind are necessary for the individual to become conscious of himself. But here there is the difference that although everyone becomes equally conscious of his body as a separate and complete organism, everyone does not become equally conscious of himself as a complete and separate personality. The feeling of apartness from others come to most with oh, although everyone becomes equally conscious of his body as a separate and complete organism, everyone does not become equally conscious of himself as a complete and separate personality. The feeling, yes, the feeling of apartness from others comes to most with puberty, but it's not always developed to such a degree as to make the difference between the individual and his fellows notable to the individual. It's such as he as little conscious of himself as the bee in the hive, who are the lucky in life, for they have the best chance of happiness. Their activities are shared by all, and their pleasures are only pleasures because they are enjoyed in common. You will see them on White Monday dancing on Hampstead Head. Let's read this again with puberty. Is it puberty? 青春期呀 puberty.
Puberty.
我读是对的，
Puberty.
讲对。Puberty. 青春期 The feeling of from others comes to most with puberty, but is not always developed to such a degree as to make the difference between the individuals and his fellows noticeable to the individuals. The feeling of apartness from others comes to most with puberty, but it is not always developed to such a degree as to make the difference between the individual and his fellows noticeable to the individual. It is such as he as little conscious of himself as the bee in a hive, who are the lucky in life, for they have the best chance of happiness. Their activities are shared by all. They are and their pleasure are only pleasure because they are enjoyed in common. You will see them on White Monday dancing on Hampstead Heath, shouting at a football match, or from club window in Pall Mall cheering a royal procession. It is because of them that man had been called a social animal. It's because of them that man has been called a social animal. Philip passed from the innocence to bitter consciousness of himself by the ridicule which his clubfoot had exacted. The circumstance of his kiss was so peculiar, peculiar. Mm. Philip passed from the innocence of childhood to better consciousness of himself by the ridicule which his clubfoot had exacted. The circumstance of his kiss was so peculiar that he could not apply to them the ready-made rules which act well enough in ordinary affairs. He could not. The circumstance of his kiss was so peculiar that he could not apply to them the ready-made rule which act well enough in ordinary affairs, and he was forced to think for himself. The many books he had read filled his mind with ideas which, because he only gave more scope to his imagination, beneath his painful shyness something was growing up within him, and obscurely he realized his personality, but at times it gave him odd surprise. He did things he knew not why, but afterward, when he thought of them, found himself all at sea. There was a boy called Luard, a boy called Luard, between whom and Philip a friendship had arisen. And one day, when they were playing together in the schoolroom, Luard began to perform some trick with an ebony penholder of Philip's. Ebony penholder. Trick. Ebony.乌木的. Oh. With an let's see, is it ebony? Ebony. It is ebony. Ebony. 乌木的. Began to perform some trick with an ebony penholder of Philip's. Don't play the giddy ox, said you will only break it. I shan't. Don't play the giddy ox. What's giddy? 轻浮的，轻狂的。Ox 不是牛吗？轻浮的，轻佻的。Don't play the giddy ox, said Philip. You will only break it. I shan't. But no sooner were the words out of boy's mouth than the penholder snapped in two. Loward looked at Philip with dismay. Oh, I say, I'm awful sorry. awfully sorry." The tears rolled down Philip's cheek, but he didn't answer. "I see. What's the matter?" said Lowood with surprise. "I will get you another one exactly the same." "It's not about the penholder I care," said Philip, in a trembling voice. "Only it was given me by my mater just before he died." "I see. I'm awfully sorry, Carrie." "It doesn't matter. It wasn't your fault." Philip took the two pieces of his penholder and looked at them. He tried to restrain he felt utterly miserable. He felt utterly miserable, and yet he could not tell why, for he knew quite well that he had bought the penholder during his last holiday at Blackstable for 1 and 2 pence. He didn't know in the least he didn't know in the least what had made him invent that pathetic story, but he was quite as unhappy as though it had been true. The perilous atmosphere of the the pairs
Pious.
pairs atmosphere，你也可以虔诚的，也可以是伪善的。That's so funny，虔诚的，伪善的。伪善的。Pairs. The Pairs atmosphere of the vicarage and the religious tone of the school had made Philip's conscience, conscience, conscience very sensitive. He absorbed insensibly the feeling about him that the temple was even on the watch to gain his immortal soul, and though he was not more thoughtful than most boys, he never told a lie without suffering from remorse. Yes, see, he absorbed intensively the feeling about himself. He absorbed intensively, insensibly, insensibly, insensibly，怎么这么慢呢？insensibly，无知觉的
Insensibly.
sensible，无知觉的
Insensibly.
没有知觉的，极微的。He absorbed
Insensibly.
极微的，我觉得极微的比较好。Oh no，极微的。He absorbed insensibly the feeling about him that the temple was even on the watch to gain his enormous soul. And though he was not more truthful than most boys, not more truthful, and though he was not more truthful than most boys, he never told a lie with remorse.
Remorse.
自责懊悔 from remorse 自责。No no no，自责。Oh no no no，哦，自责。懊悔。When he thought over this incident, he was very much distressed, and made up his mind that he must go to Lowood and tell him that the story was an invention. Though he dreaded humiliation more than anything in the world, he hugged himself for 2 or 3 days at the thought of the agonizing joy of humiliating himself to the glory of the oh. Though he dreaded for humiliation, though he dreaded humiliation more than anything in the world, he hugged himself for 2 or 3 days at the thought of the um, agonizing joy. Agonizing.
Agonizing.
Agonizing joy 使人极度痛苦的。Agonizing 极度痛苦的。Agonizing joy of humiliating himself to the glory of God. But he never got any further. He satisfied his conscience. He satisfied his conscience by the more comfortable method of expressing his repentance of the expressing his repentance 忏悔 yes
Repentance.
by more he satisfied his conscience by the more comfortable method of expressing his repentance
Repentance.
only to Almighty 造物主 Almighty Almighty to the Almighty 这个是全能的万能的 The Almighty 全能的万能的就是上帝了全能万能的Almighty but he could not understand why he should have been so geniusly affected by the story he was making up. But he could not understand why he should have been so geniusly affected by the story he was making up. The tears that flowed down his grubby cheek were real tears. Grubby 脏脏的 grubby 卑鄙的 No, I don't think it's 卑鄙的脏脏的污秽的 The tears that flowed down his grubby cheek were real tears. Then by some accident of association there occurred to him that scene when Emma had told him of his mother's death, and though he could not speak for crying, he had insisted on going in say goodbye to the Miss Wonkin so that they might see his grief and pity him. Oh. Then by some accident of association association, there occurred to him that scene when Emma had told him of his mother's death, and though he could not speak for crying, he had insisted on going in to say goodbye to the Miss Wonkin so that they might see his grief and pity him. Poor boy. Then a wave of religiosity. Then a wave of religiosity passed through the school. A wave of not religious, religiosity. Religiosity, 宗教信仰。Religiosity. Religiosity passed through 宗教信仰。虔诚。
Religiosity. Religiosity.
Then a wave of religiosity passed through the school. Bad language was no longer heard. Bad language was no longer little nasty, and the little nastinesses of small boy were looked upon with hostility. The bigger boys, like the Lord Temporal of the Middle Age, used the strength of their arms to persuade those those weaker than themselves to vicious courses. 神圣的。Then a wave of religiosity passed through the school. Bad language was no longer heard, and the little nastiness of small boy were looked upon with hostility.啊？ And the lateness of the small boy were looked upon with hostility. 哦，敌意，知道了。And the little nastiness of small boy were looked upon with hostility. The bigger boys, like the Lord Temporal,时间的世俗的 like the land temporal of the Middle Age. 世俗的时间 of the Middle Age used the strength of their arm to persuade those weaker than themselves to virtuous
Virtuous. Virtuous.
有道德的，贞洁的。有道德的，有道德的，贞洁的。Virtuous causes then use the strength of their arms to persuade those weaker than themselves to virtuous causes. Philip, his restless mind, await for new things, become very devout. Await, 渴望。Avid,
Avid.
渴望。Avid for. 渴望。 avid for. Philip, his restless man, avid for new things, became very devout. He heard soon that it was possible to join a League, and wrote to London for particulars. This consisted in a form to be filled up with a blanket name, age, and school, a solemn declaration to be signed that he would read a set portion of Holy Scripture every night of the year. 上课吗？上课啦。Oh, then I'll finish today. Let's finish here.